Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about My Best Friend Anne Frank. My Best Friend Anne Frank is an historical drama that is loosely connected to the story of Anne Frank, putting more of a focus on the close friendship she shared with her friend Hannah Goslar, as it explores the daily lives they lived together in Nazi-occupied Amsterdam before they became separated from each other. Just as Anne Frank's story had been done before, Hannah's is recounted through memoirs of her experiences she wrote, juggling the narrative between her bond with Anne and the horrific conditions she was forced to endure while detained in a concentration camp due to her Jewish faith. Having grown up being aware of the story of Anne Frank, I always wondered what other kinds of stories existed from friends and family members in her circle, and this movie does a great job at capturing the essence of both Anne and her friend Hannah in an interesting way. Since Hannah is the main character of the story, I'll start by discussing her first. She's portrayed as a very quiet, conservative girl who's dedicated to her faith and family, yet finds herself getting into trouble due to antics that are brought about by her friend Anne. These antics appear innocent at first glance, but both girls' families make it abundantly clear how their behavior could land not just them in trouble, but also their entire families. In this way, the movie establishes its tone within the first few minutes while conveying sympathy for her character at the same time. Despite being persecuted for her faith, Hannah remains optimistic, uplifted by the love of her family and friend Anne Frank. Her dedication to Anne in particular was the most striking characteristic about her, as it helped to provide a foundation for the events around them, as well as making her character even more endearing. And speaking of Anne, she is very much the opposite of Hannah, at least in how she's portrayed in this movie. Unlike Hannah, who's more shy and reserved in nature, Anne likes to socialize, joke with people, and, as mentioned earlier, often does things she's not allowed to do, like going to the movie theater or sneaking in other places she's not supposed to be. This made for a good dynamic between the two protagonists. Their different natures both complement and clash with each other, as Anne is able to be assertive and stick up for Hannah in one situation, while they may find themselves in conflict with each other in another, such as when Anne pushes Hannah too far past her comfort zone. This increased the variety of interactions they had throughout the story, which kept things moving along at an even pace in what is essentially a coming-of-age scenario as the two girls grow into their womanhood during a dark period in human history, resulting in the two having to grow up faster and adapt to the world around them. Not only do they have to adapt to growing Nazi occupation, but they also have to adapt to the perimeters of their friendship. Since Anne is more social than Hannah, she ends up spending time with other girls besides Hannah, and this causes Hannah to feel resentment toward Anne that builds later on. I do like this aspect of the movie and how it shows Hannah's loneliness beginning to manifest, which becomes a problem later on, as well as how bad Anne feels in being pressured to spend time with her other friends, and how this all instills division within an already segregated minority. However, the filmmakers didn't quite nail this area as well as they could have. I think the main problem lies with Anne's friend Coco, who just isn't as developed compared to the other girls. She's only in a few scenes, yet is made out to be the boss of this so-called secret club between the girls, which I don't remember being mentioned earlier in the movie. I'm not sure if she was an actual friend of Anne's in real life or not, but here all she did was stir up artificial conflict. At the same time, this does allow for the movie to show the kind of lasting impact that Anne had on Hannah. Throughout the story, Hannah runs into seemingly impossible situations, and she learns to deal with them by covering her eyes and then asking herself, what would Anne do? This was a great way of developing Hannah's character to show how she gathers the courage she previously lacked. This leads me to talk about how the rest of the movie is structured. As I mentioned earlier, it alternates between two time periods, the first in 1942, just before Anne hid in the annex with her family, and the second from 1944 to 45 in the Bergen concentration camp where both girls were imprisoned. I found this second part of the movie to be both the most interesting and weakest part of the movie, if that makes any sense. On one hand, the emotional weight and stakes of the narrative increase tenfold while Hannah's in the camp, but on the other hand, there's a lot of little things she does while there that don't make a lot of sense. There is an excellent level of attention to detail that went into portraying the camp itself. Prisoners work long hours of grueling physical labor in filthy conditions, which adds to the atmosphere of death that looms in every scene. From characters getting sick and dying, to gunshots sounding off in the distance, there's a constant feeling of dread that adds suspense in Hannah's struggle to survive. It's clear at this point that Hannah has grown as a character following her interactions with Anne, while doing her best to maintain the childhood innocence of her younger sister Gabby. Seeing Hannah be a role model to Gabby in this way demonstrated how much influence Anne had on her while promoting her humanity amidst the suffering around her. Sometimes, however, Hannah's actions in the camp come off as unrealistically bold. One example of this is when she runs off from her fellow group of prisoners and hides behind a wall in the middle of a roll call, proceeds to have a flashback to a simpler time with her and Anne, and then she sneaks back like nothing happened. She frequently puts herself and her sister in danger, like when she makes the same excuse over and over to visit her dad in the sickbay and steals food while doing so. Now, she does have a good reason, as she and her sister are starving like everyone else in the camp, but she's not even subtle about taking the food. She just walks up to a desk or cupboard and steals food in plain sight, and no one seems to bat an eye over it. Although little things like these can be immersion breaking at times, thankfully they don't happen often enough to be a big deal. More emphasis is placed on Hannah's chores, which allows her to bond with her fellow prisoners in the same way that she did with Anne, through sharing stories and singing songs together, which inspires hope for everyone involved. This theme of hope is prevalent throughout both sections of the movie. Hannah becomes attached to two symbols, one being a book about Florence Nightingale, which depicts her own desire in becoming a nurse, and another being a ring given to her by her father, which she plans to give to her future husband. In this regard, I really like that the theme of hope goes beyond just the prospect of the Holocaust ending. It provides a more individualized perspective into how the Holocaust affected one specific person in Hannah, especially after she reunites with Anne one final time in what is by far the most heartbreaking scene in the movie. The movie's technical presentation is authentic in its depiction of the time period it takes place. 1940s Amsterdam is portrayed in living color, which perfectly contrasts the squalor of the camp, all of which are accentuated by a hauntingly beautiful soundtrack that leaves an impression of the evil that comes, passes, and lingers after. One technical element bothered me that doesn't really concern the movie itself, but with how Netflix went about presenting it. I noticed in some scenes where characters speak multiple languages that Netflix only consistently subtitled the Dutch portions, while inconsistently so with German, and never with Hungarian and other languages. After realizing that half of the dialogue wasn't subbed, I had to fiddle with my settings until I ended up going with the English closed caption subs, which allowed more German to show, but sadly the other languages were neglected. I don't understand how one English setting can have more subtitles than another English setting, and I'd be curious to hear what your experiences were like with the subs too. Overall, My Best Friend and Frank is an excellent drama and a unique take on the story of both Hannah Gosler and Anne Frank, allowing their experiences to promote a message of hope and peace in combination with an unconventional coming-of-age tale. If you like coming-of-age stories and you're looking for one that takes place in a World War setting, I definitely think you'd enjoy watching this movie. I found out while making this review that both Hannah Gosler and her sister Gabby are actually still alive as of February this year, which I'm very thankful for. Although there's a few strange narrative choices involved in this adaptation, it still remains compelling to watch, and I'm happy that their story will continue to be told and live on, just like Hannah's best friend Anne Frank. What did you think about this movie? Were you moved by the relationship between Anne and Hannah, or were there parts about it that didn't make sense to you? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways guys, that's going to be my review of My Best Friend and Frank. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the Egyptian series, Finding Ola. Bye bye!